Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining to Oceana's Keep Oceans Fishy event. We shall be starting in just a second. We're going to allow some more people to enter the Zoom. If at any time you'd like to ask Q&A for our panelists, go ahead and add that in the Q&A section of the Zoom, and we will have time at the end of the event to speak with our panelists. Well, let's get started. Welcome, and everyone, thank you so much for joining Women in Fisheries Science and Ocean Conservation Part 2. Oceana hosted our first event of Women in Fisheries and Science and Ocean Conservation in September of 2021. It was so well received. We've once again assembled a fabulous panel of amazing women who are working to protect and conserve ocean resources through science, policy, business, education, and advocacy, inspiring the next generation of young people interested in using ocean science to keep our oceans fishy. My name is Nancy Downs. I'm the Senior Field Representative for Oceana in the state of Massachusetts. I'd like to begin the program by acknowledging the original peoples and stewards of the land that I'm zooming in from. Today, I'm joining you from Millis, Massachusetts, on the ancestral lands of the Massachusetts people. I'm fortunate to be able to do this work on lands that have been cared for by many indigenous communities of the past, present, and future. And today I'm joined by two of my associates in other parts of the country. So I'd like to pass the mic over to Sarah, who will introduce herself.
Good morning or good afternoon. I'm Sarah Holsconnect, Oceana Field Representative in Washington State, located just outside Seattle on traditional ancestral Snohomish lands. And I will pass the mic to Anna.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Anna Weschner-Dunning, and I am the Mid-Atlantic Field Representative, so working in Maryland and Delaware, and I am currently on Cherokee land.
Thanks, ladies. And for those of you zooming in from other parts of the country, we invite you to explore the history and deepen your knowledge of the indigenous communities in your local area. Learn more about their culture, experiences, and environmental priorities, and do your best to support policies that integrate those conservation principles. One of my associates will be sharing a link in the chat where you can do so to learn more. And before we hear from our panelists, I wanted to just touch lightly on what the Magnuson-Stevens Act is. This is why we're talking to you today about keeping our oceans fisheries. The Magnuson-Stevens Act, or you may hear it called MSA, is our nation's blue ribbon, science-based fisheries management law. It's often described as the world's envy in fisheries management. The MSA sets the standards and parameters of how we govern marine fisheries in the United States federal waters and fosters the long-term biological and economic sustainability of marine fisheries. Under the MSA, U.S. fisheries management aims to be transparent and a public process of science, management, innovation, and collaboration with the fishing industry. Some of the objectives of the MSA include promoting healthy fish habitat, reducing fishery bycatch, rebuilding fish stocks, improving accountability and representation in fishery management, enhancing fisheries data collection and management, supporting fishing communities, and protecting forage fish. And I'll tell you what, the MSA works. It works because of its strong conservation principles. These success stories are due to the law's requirements in halting overfishing, rebuilding fish stocks, and protecting our ocean resources. Thanks to past bipartisan reauthorization of the law, many of our fisheries have come back from the brink of collapse after decades of chronic overfishing. So thanks for giving me a few minutes to highlight the Magnuson-Stevens Act. And now, without further ado, I'd like to pass my mic over to Sarah, who will introduce our first panelist. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Nancy. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Lyda Harris, who has recently started a new position as an environmental sustainability and conservation scientist at Boeing. Previously, she was the Clean Seas Research Scientist Lead at Seattle Aquarium. And in this role, she managed, led, and grew the organization's marine debris program through expanding research funding and partnerships, as well as waste reduction efforts in-house. Lyda has over 10 years of experience in marine pollution, data science, zero waste, and public policy. She earned her PhD from the University of Washington in the Department of Biology, studying marine microplastic pollution and how it affects organisms, ecosystems, and policy. Welcome, Lyda.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you for joining. We're so thrilled that you can be here. And can we move on to the next slide, please? I think we have a bit more about Lyda's journey. So as I sort of already mentioned, you've worked across many areas of marine science as well as geographic regions. Can you tell us a bit more about your background?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you again for having me. I wanted to explain kind of my background and my point of view from a place-based perspective. So this slide is quite jumbled, but I wanted to start off saying that I am from Tucson, Arizona. So in the bottom left-hand corner, that little house with a heart, which is landlocked. And I would take vacations we would drive down to the Sea of Cortez or the Gulf of California in Mexico. And we would also go and visit my grandparents up in Whidbey Island, just north of Seattle. And so those are the two kind of white outlined doodads at the bottom left and top left corners. And so that really established my love of the ocean in two different places. So one was very warm waters in the Gulf of California, and one was very cold, temperate waters in the Salish Sea. And from both of those places, I just loved looking under rocks, playing in the sand, swimming in the waters when I could and it was warm enough, to the point that when I was in high school, I did a science fair project based on copepods, so plankton in the Gulf of California, and if they were ingesting plastics or not, because I was really fascinated with this element of anthropogenic debris or like human-made debris in our natural environments. So from there, that really informed what I wanted to do, kind of, but I have a lot of different varied experiences to get to where I am today. So from there, I went to college at the University of Chicago, another relatively landlocked state. We have the great lakes, but nothing ocean. I was able to work my way into a lab studying algae and kelp that went out into Tatoosh Island, which is on Macaw Land out on the outer coast of Washington State. And so I went back to Washington, to this place that I really loved, even though it was nice and cold, really cold during the summer. From there, I went back to Chicago. I needed to be paid, and the lab can no longer fund me to do any more work. And so I transitioned to a lab looking at birds and bird feathers, which I learned that I don't really like birds. So I got away from that and went into a lab at the Field Museum of Natural History studying the biomechanics of lionfish, which are this very invasive fish in the Caribbean and the Atlantic that eat pretty much everything. So looking at how successful they are at eating. After college, I went to the Marine Biological Laboratory out in Woods Hole, where I had an opportunity to study color change in cephalopods, so particularly cuttlefish, which gave me this perspective of how skin can change and how organisms can change to meet their environment where they are and their habitat and their place. And then I started a PhD program at University of Washington studying mussels, which is the lab that I went into. And so I have this kind of unique perspective of biomechanics, natural history, and ecology, and adaptive change. And so I went into a lab that does a lot of ocean change work. And I was still really fascinated by this question of how people influence the environment. And so I brought with me my knowledge of plastics from when I did a science fair project in high school, my experiences from college and from after college, as well as my love of the Pacific Northwest. And I studied how plastics degrade in the environment and also affect the physiology, biomechanics, and different elements of organisms and how organisms can potentially adapt or change based on their environment. So after my PhD, I went to the Seattle Aquarium and led their microplastic program and their clean seas program, really expanding what they did. And this was a wonderful opportunity to further my work and kind of progress the science of marine microplastics. But I still wasn't quite getting that actionable change of how do we influence people's behavior and make the world a better place, I guess. So I'm switching to Boeing actually in 2 days. I haven't started yet to work on behavioral change and working on their 4 main sustainability aspects between waste reduction, toxic waste, greenhouse gases, and carbon to really go inside the industry level and the corporate level to make a change instead of waiting for policies to happen or waiting for other people to do it, to really push this large company that's in so many different places to make a change that will actually have a huge environmental impact. So that's kind of the perspective I'm coming from.
Wonderful, and congratulations on your new role. I'm so glad that you've landed in the Pacific Northwest after lots of experience around the country. So there are increasingly more women starting careers in science, and I'm curious, what is your experience as a woman in this field?
Yeah, so I have found my initial positions I had were very male dominated, especially with biomechanics, which is a lot of engineering and physics. So there was that aspect of it. However, the more I move into conservation and sustainability and waste reduction, the more women I work with. And so both my team at the Seattle Aquarium as well as the team I'm joining at Boeing are entirely women. And so I think it both shows a lot of empowerment that we have. And I love being on those teams, but it also highlights the need for increased diversity, both in terms of we need more than just women to care about this. We need more, especially, I'm white. Most of the team is white. And so we have a lot of white women that really care about this. And so I think while it can be empowering, it also shows the lack of diversity in those spaces and the need to increase diversity in a lot of different sectors.
Absolutely. Thank you for naming that. That is so important. Yeah, so as you know, Oceana is campaigning for a healthy, abundant, and sustainable fisheries policy. And based on your research, in a lot of different areas, why are strong fisheries policies important?
Yeah, so we've seen time and time again that as we have increased regulations of our fisheries, we see increased beneficial effects. And so whether you're looking at marine protected areas or you're looking at specifically the catch that you're allowed in different regions, we're learning that we can't just go out and harvest everything, that we really need a sustainable ecosystem level approach and a really place-based approach, that whatever works in Massachusetts or Maine is not going to work in California or Washington necessarily, or Alaska, and that we need to come with those place-based approaches. We need to learn the ecosystems, and once we do that, we can go towards more sustainable fishing practices or aquaculture practices and really learn how the systems, the marine systems, can be sustainably harvested.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for joining today. If folks have more questions for Lyda, please do put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will be doing a Q&A section at the end, and potentially can ask and get those questions answered prior as well.
All
At
right.
this,
I'm going to jump in and thank you, Lyda. I have an idea already for 2 future Zooms at Oceana. I'm going to name the first one Biomechanics of Lionfish, and the second Zoom is going to be color changes in cephalopods. Like I love it. So thank you. It's so interesting. And thank you again for joining us. So we're ready for our first poll. The question is, who was the first female scientist in American fisheries? We have Rosa Mabel Lee, Luella Cable, Sylvia Earle, or Marie Tharp. We're going to leave this up for just a couple seconds, give you all a chance. There should be a poll that pops up on your screen, and you can see who is voting for who. I think we have 23 participants, so I'm going to wait to see if we can get up to at least 20 folks that have taken the poll. We've got, let's see, 11 out of 15 have participated. Any more else? Last call. All right. So we're going to end the poll. And the answer is 27% of you got it right. It is Luella Cable. Dr. Cable was, above all, a devoted aquatic biologist and the first female scientist hired by the U.S. Bureau of Fisheries, which was the predecessor of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 1927. So thank you for taking the poll. I think I shared the results. I'm going to close that out. And back to Sarah for introducing our next speaker.
thank you, Nancy. At this point, I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Cersei Gonzalez. As Coastal Training Program Coordinator with the Chesapeake Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve in Virginia, Cersei works on informing and empowering coastal decision makers and fostering science-based and community-supported resource management and socio-ecological system resilience. Cersei brings experience in communications and outreach, natural resource management, responsible recreation, and marine ecology from her work and research with a variety of agencies and organizations, including the U.S. Federal Recreation Council, where she served as executive director, NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, and 5 U.S. marine laboratories. While navigating her career, Cersei has lived and worked in geographies from Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska to Fiji's outer islands. Cersei has a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Duke University and a Master of Marine Affairs from the University of Washington. Welcome, Cersei.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Thrilled you could join us today. So it sounds like your work has taken you all over the world. Can you share a bit more about your journey?
Oh gosh, yeah, I like to call this my river of life. It started in the Midwest along Lake Erie, where there is no salt water, clearly. And I want to actually circle back on this point, but I'll take you through. I had all kinds of fantasies about being an FBI agent, an author. I ended up settling on an aerospace engineer that transitioned to biomedical engineer as I moved into college. My first year, I discovered super quickly that that wasn't for me. And I took to biology and instantly fell in love. I had amazing experiences as an undergrad, visiting multiple marine labs around the country, doing phenomenal work on algae, micro and macro, doing some bioluminescent studies, looking at larval crabs, which I still see in my dreams and in the clouds. It was a fantastic experience, and on account of it, I wanted to pursue marine biology. So I had it in my head that I would be doing a PhD after undergrad. But in between, I wanted an international experience, something that was challenging, something that was foreign, and something that would really help me grow. So I took to the Peace Corps, and that's how I ended up in Fiji, working on locally managed marine area. And it wasn't long after that I decided I'm not going back for a PhD. I really want to work with the people on the ground and just be a little bit more applied. So I went to graduate school for my master's at, as you said, the University of Washington. My advisor there was Patrick Christie. He did a lot of community-based marine management in the Philippines then. So my research for my master's is based there. After graduate school, I really wanted to pursue international work and ended up in Washington, DC, working first for the Consortium for Ocean Leadership. I had an internship there and met somebody through couch surfing of all places that worked at the National Marine Sanctuaries. I had done a side study in grad school in concert with the tribes of the Pacific Northwest on the management of marine sanctuaries. So this was something that we had talked about in this couch surfing experience. And this person kept me in mind when a position opened in her office, and it was, you know, upwards from there. So I was in DC for 10 years before I decided that I needed a break from the headquarters, that I really wanted to get my foot back in international conservation. So I took off for some experiences in Madagascar. And those helped me really decide that, in fact, domestic work is where I could make the most impact. And so I ended up back in the States working for the NEAR system, doing what I wanted to on the ground in international spaces, but very much in a home space where we're making great strides. So that is the river of life. But I wanted to throw in this fun tweet in the chat because I saw it earlier this year and it really had me thinking about, you know, what was it that I saw in my childhood in Lake Erie that may have also influenced my decision to pursue marine biology. And it was everything that's in this Twitter feed. It was Splash, it was mermaids, it was Lisa Frank, it was SeaWorld, it was the voyage of the Mimi. So you know, if I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but as I like to say, the choir goes out and talks to the bands. You can't undervalue the importance of education at early ages. Talk about impressionable, and it all circles back. So there you have it.
Absolutely. It's so important. And thank you for sharing that. I love it. So it sounds like your work has encompassed many different areas, from marine ecology to communications, and obviously a lot of travel. What advice would you give to young women who are maybe either thinking about going to school in marine science or just beginning their career in this field?
Oh, sure. Go for it. You know, explore opportunities, find them in secret places, ask questions. The more you ask, the more you know, right? And there's a lot that's undiscovered out there in terms of careers, in terms of opportunities and funding that will allow you to get to these places. I think that remains an important part about what I do. I feel like I'm still continuously learning about what people are doing out there and blown away that somebody is getting paid to do this amazing job. Yeah, don't stop asking, don't stop pursuing. Also, maybe, you know, we have a lot of traditional notions about what success looks like. You know, it has had to do with title, it has had to do with salary, and I'd urge you to reconsider where you can find success in not only those things, but also in the time that your job affords to yourself, right? The time that allows you to travel, to see new things, to explore new ideas. There's a lot more balance there in untraditional jobs, and you know, if you allow yourself to explore them, you may discover something that you didn't know about yourself and that you really appreciate. So push back on those traditional notions.
Great advice. Thank you so much for sharing and for joining us today. So folks, please do ask Circe any questions you might have in the Q&A or the chat, and I'll turn it back over to Nancy.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Circe. I love your broad experience, and just telling folks to take that first step and all those unexpected connections along the way. And I also have a memory of telling someone what I do for Oceana, and they exclaimed, "You get paid to do that?" So yeah, people's perception of success, you just go for it. And I loved that advice. And now we are up for our next poll question. Number 2 is, what US port regularly lands the highest volume of seafood? New Bedford, Dutch Harbor, Alaska, Empire, Venice, Louisiana, or Honolulu, Hawaii? And this is the highest volume of seafood landed. Okay, a couple more seconds. Ooh, we've got New Bedford and Alaska neck to neck. So the answer to that question is B. For the 23rd consecutive year, Dutch Harbor, Alaska led the nation as the port with the highest volume of seafood landed, with 763 million pounds valued at $190 million. But the follow-up answer is the Port of New Bedford in Massachusetts is America's #1 in value. So Dutch Harbor, Alaska was 190 million. In New Bedford, it's nearly 50 million pounds of sea scallops landed there, but they're valued at 369 million that comes into New Bedford. So great answers, folks. And we're going to move on. I'm going to pass the mic over to Anna, who's going to introduce our next speaker. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you. Our next guest is Soraida Nañez-James. Soraida has been in the field of science and education for over 20 years, working in academia, for nonprofits, schools, and the Texas State Aquarium. As an education specialist with NOAA Ocean Exploration, she's helped develop and lead ocean exploration education professional development efforts. She is also a proud founder and CEO of the Gulf Reach Institute, which is a nonprofit dedicated to innovative and inclusive STEM, health, and advocacy programming focused in the Gulf of Mexico and our oceans. The Gulf of Mexico is her home and her community, and is why she's dedicated to giving back, especially working with Latinx and BIPOC youth, science communication work, and environmental justice issues. Welcome, Soraida.
Thank you so much, Anna, for the introduction, and just a pleasure to be here amongst all these amazing women in fisheries. Just a little bit about me. So you heard a little bit about my background, but looking at where I started off, so I decided I wanted to be, I used to watch a lot of Discovery channels, and that was my go-to every time. So we didn't have very much growing up, but we did have the TV and Discovery Channel, so that's where I would go. So we'd go outside, but at the same time, we would see all these amazing adventures on TV, and I wanted to do those adventures, right? So really dedicated myself to education, and wanted to be a marine biologist since I was 12. So I would say, and I wanted to be a teacher and apparently a model too. So those three combinations, if you can believe that. And I've actually gotten to do in some form or fashion, all three. So I got to become a marine biologist. I am still an educator, lifelong educator, and through some community things, I've modeled some outfits. So I got to do all three of those childhood dreams. So I consider myself very blessed. but just looking back, my first exposure really to the ocean, my love for water and my connection to water came from, in the place actually that I live now. So I'm originally from San Antonio, Texas here. And we had lakes, so we went camping and a lot of outdoor things. And, back in the days when my abuela would say, you come back when it's time to eat, so you spend your time outside. And so that was a great education in itself, just exploring nature and really appreciating it for its simplicity and complexity all at once. So I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school, and also became first generation for my bachelor's. I got my bachelor's in marine fisheries. I think some other folks, they had the journey too. I wanted to do mammals, and my first marine mammal class decided that again, I've heard this before in all of the talk from the panelists, that was not for me. But took a fisheries class and fell in love with it, and was able to. My first job was working at NOAA, at a NOAA benthic and fisheries ecology lab. And really doing what the Magnuson-Stevens Act is talking about, is looking at the habitat that really provides the home and the shelter for the fisheries that we depend on. But again, a connection to that land and sea was what really kind of fueled my passion for it. And like you said, Anna, I have a heart for the Gulf for sure. This is my home. And working with just Gulf communities and fisheries community across the Gulf, and just hearing their stories, anyone from, the Jean Choctaw in Louisiana to the Vietnamese communities, and also Hispanic communities, shrimpers, that all depend on these fisheries for their livelihood, was really eye-opening as an undergraduate student. And then also when I went into my graduate degree at A&M Corpus Christi. So really learning how to listen, how the different regulations affected them, who supported what, and really looking to see beyond what that meant for them, right? It was their livelihood at the same time. They wanted those regulations in place to some extent because it did help them to regulate and preserve what they depended on. But at the same time, looking at really incorporating their knowledge and what they knew about fisheries ecology, especially here in the Gulf. So I took a little bit about a detour. So I did fisheries ecology for a while, and then I went into restoration ecology. So looking again at those habitats and really working to conserve and preserve those habitats. Traveled a couple of, fulfilling those dreams, going to South Africa for shark research, Spain and other for benthic ecology, and just looking at different areas of things that I've really enjoyed doing. So I always say I look at the little tiniest things, the benthic, the worms that nobody likes to look at, and then how those really affect fisheries all the way to the big things, the ecosystems that we fight so hard to preserve. But one of my biggest passions, I think, and you'll see it here, is just learning and teaching others. And one of our other panelists talked about representation. That is a huge thing for me, and why I started the Gulf Reach Institute. We wanted a platform. We always say sometimes we get tired of waiting to get invited to the table, so we made our own this time. And so everybody's invited this time. And the Gulf Reach Institute, Research Institute, really focuses on trying to give the resources that communities need, and then also learning from those communities at once. We do focus, a lot of our focus is on youth and youth empowerment. Our board members are 19, are for youth engagement, are 19 and 22. And I can tell you that they've taught me a whole lot as well. They work a lot on the climate change summit here in the Gulf of Mexico, uniting our youth, not just in the US, but also in Cuba and in Mexico. We say we're one Gulf, but 3 countries. So we have to look at management across borders. We always laugh and say that we can have all the borders we want, but the fish aren't going to care. They're going to go wherever they want, the sharks included. And then how do we manage that? So really teaching them from the beginning how to work cooperatively together. And So that's been the most fun part. You know, there's the CEO part is kind of the hard part, but you know, having them or being part of their journey in some way or form has been really inspirational to me as well. I now work for NOAA Ocean Exploration as an education specialist. I produce lessons and looking for professional development, and then looking for other ways also to include more of a cultural pedagogy in there as well. So we want people to connect with what we do. So that's one thing. Oh, the slides, yes. Sorry, I forgot in the slides. You can advance it if you like. So it says your individuality is important. I loved this quote, but so is belonging. We also have to realize that belonging is not the same as fitting in. I think for a long time we tried to fit in, and that's not the same. We recognize the parts of our culture that have shaped us in the past and the parts that we want to carry with us in the future. And I thought this was important because I do come from a very traditional family, Hispanic family, that you know, had some different takes on me being in the field, especially in the fisheries ecology. A lot of times being the only woman in the field, that was kind of frowned upon, like a taboo. But at the same parts, we say that we're evolving. So we're taking the parts of our culture that, you know, that are conducive to us, that talk to us in this generation, and then taking that forward as we evolve in this community. And that's what we're going to do with it. Can you go to the next slide? I don't want to take up too much time. I put a lot of different things on here because I like to say we're not just one thing. So I am a wife, I am a mother. I have an 11-year-old daughter. I've been married 22 years. I'm an educator. I've taught in schools, informally and formally. I love all my students. I feel quite old sometimes when they're getting their master's degrees now. You see some of my field work. I work mostly with southern flounder, which is commercially and recreationally important here in Texas. I've worked with great whites. I've also sailed a lot on many of the ships looking at bathymetry and mapping the seafloor, and then presenting that and getting students really excited about just the ocean in general and just why they should protect it and how to connect. And that includes making presentations in Spanish to some of the students who predominantly spoke Spanish. So that's kind of my life in a nutshell. My passions quickly, you know, shared with all of you. But again, just super happy to be here, and just honored to listen to some of the other folks that are going to be on here as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Soraida. It's really nice to hear your story, and I appreciate you sharing.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you, Suraida. Also, just impressed that you knew since age 12 what you wanted to be. You are not just a beautiful model, but a role model. And I loved hearing about the youth engagement, which I think is so important and often overlooked. So thank you again. And now we are going to do another poll. So question number 3, the Gulf of Mexico supplies domestic seafood and provides billions of dollars a year in wages for fishing and tourism industries across 5 states. What percentage of this domestic seafood does the Gulf of Mexico supply? Give a couple minutes. All right. So the correct answer is 40%. More than 40% is domestic seafood that the Gulf of Mexico supplies, as far as wages for the fishing and tourism industries across those 5 states. Thank you for taking that poll. And close that out. Next up, we have an interview done with Anna. Anna, did you want to do a quick introduction before I go ahead and play the video?
Yes. So unfortunately, Emily could not be here live, but we will stream her interview in just a second. Our other panelist was Emily Selinger. She was born and raised in Freeport, Maine, and is a waterwoman through and through. Her business, Emily's Oysters, was founded in 2018. And it's a small-scale, woman-owned oyster farm in Freeport, Maine. where their company's goal is stewardship for health and well-being of the ocean. So yes, please go ahead and air the interview. Hi, Emily, and thank you so much for joining us today. Can you please briefly tell us a little bit about your professional and academic background?
Sure. Well, my academic background is highly unrelated to what I do for work now. I got my undergraduate degree in art history and studio art and music. Yeah, that has not really impacted what I do now, but I did grow up on the coast of Maine, and I grew up sailing with my family and teaching sailing as an early career, and that sort of evolved after college into more of a professional career working on schooners and sailboats as a deckhand, as an officer, as a relief captain up and down the coast. And that was really my first career. I, at a certain point, missed having a home base and was a little bit weary of the sort of nomadic lifestyle that comes with doing that kind of work. And I wound up back in Maine, and kind of just by chance was introduced to aquaculture through a friend, and very organically have turned that into a new way of life.
Cool to hear that just all of your lived experiences got you to where you are today, especially having a different academic background and then still being able to be in the marine science field. What would be some advice you would give to young women who are either interested in entering the workforce in marine science or getting an academic background in marine environmental science?
I think I have really, I resisted this for a long time, especially when I was in college, because I felt like I was, supposed to be there, and art history was definitely not what I was supposed to be studying, but I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be studying at the time. I think it took me a while to get to that, which was, that I really just wanted to be on the water. And from there, I don't know, at some point I stopped worrying about it, and I started to sort of be like, hey, I want to be in Maine, and here's the thing I can do, and I have all these skills, and it seems fun. And I don't know, I think if you trust knowing what you want to do, that if you want to do it, you generally will find the way to do it. And I just wish that, I had worried less and done things when I wanted to do them the first time, I think, rather than kind of dithering or waiting or, taking lesser jobs or whatever. I think, we have if we trust ourselves a little bit more when it comes to doing the things that we're really interested in or see a lot of value in, that things have a way of working out, or we find the ways to make them work out for ourselves. So
no, I'm really glad you touched on that, because I think it'll resonate with a lot of the students, especially here watching tonight, that feel like they have to go into this academic background and in marine science, and there are other opportunities to be involved. And you're right, if you find an interest that you like, there are ways to get experiences without it necessarily always having to be academic, and you don't always have to have a plan for what you want to do, but it can come more organically. And I think a lot of us had that same experience, and so it's really nice to hear someone who's a professional share that, because I don't think a lot of people talk about that. It's usually oh yes, I got my PhD at this age and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And I think it can really intimidate young women especially too. I mean, we've seen more women in science recently, and you briefly touched on being in an industry that's male dominated. So what was it like, and how is it currently like being a woman in science for you?
Well, it's great now that I'm my own boss. And I kind of I'm in control of how much I interact with the industry, which because of my experiences, I probably don't seek out as much interaction as maybe would be good for me. It's a relief to be kind of calling the shots finally. I think for younger me and for women going into male dominated and science related fields, the thing I wish that I had done was seek out more mentorship friendship, less competition with the other women who were around me when they were there, which wasn't always. But I think that, like, I don't know why it is, but we are so kind of on guard to defend ourselves, improve ourselves in those environments. And that sometimes the other women around us, if they are there, we kind of lump in with everyone else and we wind up competing with them. And that, I think, helps none of us. And I think, yeah, I wish that I had been more proactive about that and not just so kind of feeling, you know, at odds with everyone and trying to get where I wanted to go.
Yeah. No, I can definitely relate to that as well. And being in kind of a cutthroat industry and also one that's male dominated, it's hard to find your place and be heard and respected.
Yep.
And try to also have camaraderie with the other women in the industry without being too competitive, but also being strong and being seen. And it's just a very odd balance.
Yeah.
And I don't think it should be. And it's sad that it has to be that way. And I think I'm seeing it progress. And I hopefully you're, you know, in your industry, you're seeing it as well. But I think your story is definitely an inspiration to young women coming up in this industry, just seeing how you are your own boss.
And I did it, you know, without, I had some resources that made it easier, like, you know, family history in the area and access to the waterfront that not everyone has and is definitely helpful. But I didn't really have a lot else, you know, and it is, I don't know, you can do a lot with very little if you have the patience and the time. And I did make the effort to build some like really key relationships with another woman, chiefly, who really like helped me out as I helped her out as we started, you know, our own separate businesses nearby. And yeah, I don't know, you can do a lot with not much.
Yeah, and especially just with a passion and desire, and you can do a lot. So yeah, well, thank you for sharing. And then, you know, Oceana is campaigning for healthy, abundant, and sustainable fisheries policy. And so what does strong fisheries policy look like to you and your business?
I think that, you know, I kind of view fisheries policy. I come from Maine, first of all, which is a fisheries heavy place. Our communities are very shaped and dependent by commercial fisheries and more so by aquaculture as well, which kind of gets lumped into the fisheries, you know, category, even though we're not really a wild fishery. But I think everything from like protecting the natural environment, making sure we're not overfishing, making sure that aquaculture operations are operating in a way that doesn't damage marine ecosystems. Like all of that is fisheries policy that is essential to, you know, keeping our oceans healthy enough to sustain fisheries and therefore to sustain, you know, the community that I live in and my friends and my family. And it's also in Maine, it's very baked into like our way of life. And I think any Mainer you talk to, especially if they come from coastal areas, is like, you know, we have something special here and a lot of it has to do with our coastal fisheries. So it's very much tied into that. And then the other important piece, I think, especially with shellfish is, you know, that good fisheries policy kind of translates pretty directly into the public trust in our product and the quality of the product that goes to market. And we're all sort of subject to the same kind of larger brand of Maine seafood. And for me, you know, oysters that come from Maine. And good policy just makes sure that we are, you know, keeping up with the quality side of things too. I think that is really important as well.
Well, thank you so much. And we've really enjoyed having you share your experience. And yes, if anyone has any questions, we will be able to put up your contact information on our slide. Yeah, so
Great.
yeah. All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi.
Okay, that was Emily of Emily's Oysters. And thank you, Anna, so much for organizing that interview with Emily. And now we've got our final poll. In 2019, the average American ate how many pounds of fish and shellfish in 1 year? And this was provided by our panelist, Soraida. Thank you, Soraida, for that question. I know for me personally, it would be like 1,000 pounds. Oh, it's a tough one, folks. Which one's it going to be? And actually, Sarah or Anna, I realize I've written the wrong answer on the bottom of my poll question. So I'm wondering if one of you actually have the answer to this question.
Yeah, the answer is C, 19.2 pounds. So we had 18% of folks get the right answer on this one. That was based on 2019 statistics, which was a slight increase of 0.2 pounds from 2018. Just for reference, the USDA's dietary guidelines for Americans recommends that people eat 2 4-ounce servings of seafood each week. This would be 26 pounds per year for an individual.
Thank you, Sarah. All right.
Absolutely.
And now I'd like to open up the floor. We've got about 8 minutes left before we hit the top of the hour, and I think we may have a handful of questions for our panelists.
Yeah, and we had some great questions in the Q&A functionality. So if you do have others you want to ask, I'd encourage you to do so. One question that that a few of our panelists have answered, but I thought it'd be great to put to the group, is why do you think that women are leading this effort versus men?
Anyone want to take that?
Yeah, I can start off because I answered that slightly in the chat. So I've talked about this specifically because the groups I have worked with recently have been all women, whereas my education and past in other fields were predominantly men focused or led. And so we kind of just, as we're like out in the field together, like, oh, we're all women, like, why? And one of the things that we talked about was that women are traditionally the ones that carry a lot of the emotional burden for communities, as well as are the traditional caregivers for the family or community unit. And so that often translates to caring about the earth as an extended family member or an extended unit of the community, because it is like we get everything from the earth, and thinking about the children and the grandchildren and will they have food and resources moving forward. And so when you look at who's currently leading a lot of, especially the youth environmental movements, they are also young women or girls that are pushing that forward. And so we see that time and time again. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I love being in that space, but it is definitely a space where it's predominantly women often. And that can have other systemic impacts and effects, especially when you think about the gender pay gap.
Okay, do we have any other questions for the panelists? I'd love one of you just maybe highlight this idea of not being afraid to seek out a mentor. Like as you are early, stepping out the door can be a little scary getting started in ocean conservation and fisheries and knowing where to go. And was there someone who maybe helped you lead the way?
I can answer that one. So we focused a lot on mentorship So especially, I think you brought it up. Is it Lyda? Is that I correct? About, there are a lot of women now, more even in NOAA. So we just had our, DEI report, but we also know that 60% of those women are actually white women. So having mentorship in the beginning, when I did marine fisheries, there was no women at the college that I went teaching classes, like not even one. And so when I had to seek out mentors that were either in the field or going into the field or just that had representation. The biggest one, I think, that really influenced me, it was in my graduate school. So she was actually the dean for science and engineering, and she has an amazing background. She was actually one of the founding members of SACNAS, which is a Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science, and has been my mentor to this day. But I think having that that perspective of somebody who's been in the field, who's gone through some of the things that maybe you will not go through, because I know I went through a lot of different things, being a woman and then also being a minority. So another layer to that. I think it helps. You have to build a community. I don't think you can't do it alone. I would say everything I've done because somebody's helped me along the way. I've had to work pretty hard to get where I, to do the things that I've done, but at the same time, having that community, it has been immensely supportive and important in my career, for sure.
Thank you for answering that. And I think unless any of the panelists has a closing statement, we're going to wrap up with a call to action. So any other closing remarks?
I think just like I said before,
sorry.
no, I just like before, if you feel like there's not a place where you belong or there's not a space for you, and we heard a lot of the panelists do that. We make our own spaces now. So we don't have to wait for somebody to invite us or, kind of sit around. We can do our own thing now. And we have the support. And I love that we can support each other in it.
Thank you so much. So first of all, thank you to the panelists for giving your time and sharing your stories with us. And thank you to all of you who decided to tune in and join us for this special discussion today. But now it's time we turn to you and ask for your help, those attending today, to take action. A vote for a strong Magnuson-Stevens Act is a vote for our oceans, and we're counting on your support. If you have used a QR code before, you simply hold up your smartphone, of course it doesn't, as if you're going to take a picture of that where it says sign our petition. And when you hold your phone up to take a picture of that square, it will actually pull up a link, and you simply touch the screen on your phone. There's a little, either a link or on an iPhone, a little yellow thing will come up. So don't actually take a picture, just hold it up as if you're going to take a picture. And if that doesn't work, we also have a link at oceana.org/keepoceansfishy, and that will take you to our current petition to call on support. Just a few weeks ago, a really strong reauthorization of this bill was introduced, and the more support we have, the better chance we have for strengthening the Magnuson-Stevens Act. So please follow Oceana on social media. We hope you'll join us for future events, either in person or online. And I will keep this screen up for just a few more minutes as we close out today's event. Thank you for helping keep our oceans fishy. Have a great day.